Hello and welcome everybody to another One Firm webinar. This is Ben Chiriboga, the Chief Growth Officer here at Nexl. Super excited to be speaking with Bruce MacEwen today, the President of Adam Smith ESQ. Bruce, how are you? While we're waiting for everybody, I know that you just joined from New York, and you are here today despite Microsoft making it very difficult for you to sign on. Bruce, how are you today?
I'm great. Spring is toying with us here in New York. It's cold, it's warm, it's cold, it's warm.
Yes, I've
So
heard.
be
I've
it.
heard the back and forth. Yes, totally. Let's go ahead and kick off, everybody. We want to welcome everybody to another One Firm webinar series. I am sitting down with Bruce MacEwen, the president of Adam Smith ESQ, world famous around the world for its management consulting into law firms. But today we're going to talk specifically about law firms, and we're going to tap into Bruce's immense understanding of law firms. You've written 3 books. Do you want to say very quickly just a little bit about the 3 books before we get into our 3 topics today, which I'll go ahead and prompt those after this.
Sure.
But yeah, say a
So
little bit about the books.
the first is the maroon cover on the left. Growth is dead. Now what? I wrote this after the great financial crisis of 2008-9, and it got a lot of flack for it at the time, which is fine. I kind of enjoyed it, but it turns out that growth has indeed been dead in terms of big log revenue outpacing headcount and inflation. If you adjust, the AmLaw 200, let's say, for growth in headcount and inflation, there has not been real revenue increase. There's been nominal revenue increases, to be sure. So that's one reason competition is more intense and so forth. The second book was actually the dark green cover book, A New Taxonomy, the 7 law firm business models. This was the product of frustration and indignation on my part. I seem to keep hearing again and again that, all law firms are the same, and there's only, it's the billable hour and it's profits per partner. And I kept saying to myself, no, they're not all the same. They're different models of law firms. So that was an attempt to categorize the 7 major law firm business models, as I put it at the time. The most recent book, 2017, it came out, was Tomorrowland: Scenarios for Law Firms Beyond the Horizon. This is a truthful title. It's scenarios, it's not predictions. So what are the scenarios? Well, the sort of compulsory scenario, which is the first chapter, is nothing changes. Been predicting massive change in our industry for quite a while. So far, massive change has not happened. And of course, I can't stop myself. No promises as to publication date, but I do have a 4th book in the works, which will be, as each of these was unlike its predecessors, this 4th will be unlike the 3 you're looking at. But
Yes.
that remains to be seen. So
hopefully everybody was listening, because I think it was helpful. I wanted to add a backdrop of the 3 books because I do think that there's a thread line to today's 3 major pillar topics, which is all around what's next. Now, if growth is dead, what's next? What are different models? How do you drive profitability? And I think that's what we're really speaking about today. So we're going to try to go through 3 different pillar topics. The first is the current state of the economy vis-a-vis law firms. And I think the book Growth is Dead probably is probably a good primer for thinking about that, and maybe you can dig deep into that. Are we in a VUCA situation, which maybe some of you will know is an acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex or chaotic, and ambiguous, and what does that really mean? The next part of this is rethinking, or the factors that drive into profitability. I know that you want to speak a little bit about profitability and what does that actually mean within law firms. And I think New Taxonomies, the book, is probably a good idea for thinking about how profitability, by virtue of the business model, can drive different profitability profitabilities. And then last, maybe strategies for increasing profitabilities within law firms. And I always think Tomorrowland and Lawland would be interesting in that. But maybe we can think about new type of business models. But I want to start with the first pillar, and I've taken this from a very recent article that you wrote on Adam Smith ESQ. Okay, that sounds a lot like VUCA to me. In response, you wrote the following article: No, the business cycle has not been repealed. Capitalism without failure is like religion without hell. To this first pillar, what's the situation right now for law firms, and what's the current economy like for law firms right now as kind of like a set stage for this?
VUCA is not a bad description, Ben. I've never seen. Actually, Larry Summers said this. Larry Summers said on Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago, I have never in my life seen such conflicting data. And nobody knows. I mean, the parlor game is, will we or won't we have a recession? And to me, that's not a terribly interesting topic. They're always called way after the fact in any event. But there's no model from prior experience in my life or in the economic history I've read that matches what we're going through today. Very high employment, very low unemployment, and very high inflation, and very strong consumer spending, and incredible uncertainty in the world. If you know what Putin or Xi Jinping's next move is going to be, God bless, because the rest of us don't. It's just incredibly uncertain. So I think, without rushing things, Ben, this actually takes us immediately to the next stage for the purposes of this audience. What should law firms do? The answer is somewhat unnatural behavior for law firms, but I really think it's essential if you want to be a resilient, non-fragile law firm. And it's be nimble, be prepared to change things quickly, and talk to your partners and your associates and professional staff and clients about what that might mean. Very hard to cut the fixed cost base of a law firm quickly. It's basically people and space. People are extremely hard to cut. It's inhumane. Many of them won't deserve it. You may wish you'd kept many of them, down the road. Space takes even longer to change. But tell your partners that, this profit pie is not going to grow to the sky year after year after year. There may be a year or two of shared sacrifice, and emphasis on shared. But there's no reason for any individual to think in the long run they can do better than the firm.
Yes,
They
right.
can't.
So let me jump in very quickly, because you got to pillar 2, and I think, just to summarize, we're in a VUCA environment. Nobody really knows what's going to happen, and some hard decisions need to be and some hard conversations maybe need to be had. I want to prompt you about what can law firms do, and get your reaction to 4 pieces of news that came from law.com, specifically their management, and maybe this will just prompt and get us to pillar 2. So the first is, the AmLaw 100, of course, came out. The ranking by revenue per lawyer. The byline, interestingly enough, was, with more lawyers and less demand, revenue per lawyer took a tumble. That seems to be the byline. The second, just a couple hours after that, was, can rates make up for expense growth much longer? Rates and expenses have a limited window to rise in unison before law firms have to turn to innovation. The next, same day, different writer, a step back but still ahead, an analysis of the 2023 AmLaw 100. While 2022 was a return to reality, 2023 may be a real challenge. And then last but not least, Private equity shift. Big law may be losing its golden goose. Reliance on work that propels firms into the upper echelons of the industry may no longer be a safe bet, but there may be other ways to approach private capital. What are the factors that are affecting profitability within law firms? And what should law firms start to think about, specifically maybe around this idea of profitability?
The revenue per lawyer down had to happen. It may have happened in nominal dollars. The way we calculate it, as I mentioned earlier, it's been going on in constant in inflation adjusted dollars for a while. Revenue per lawyer has been very soft, and of course the headcount keeps growing. Anytime your headcount in lawyers grows faster than your revenue, I'm not sure what you're talking about if you call that a successful year.
Right.
You're losing revenue per lawyer. Finally, it was recognized in the AmLaw numbers, in real numbers. I'm not surprised. There may be too many lawyers in the AmLaw 100 and 200. You can never have too many superstars, but they're not all superstars. And there have been a lot of people making a lot of money that may discover that they were living above market for a little while. That makes nobody happy, least of all me, least of all those people affected, but it may be reality. Let me jump ahead to the private equity observation and then back to innovation. Private equity is cyclical. This should surprise nobody. J.P. Morgan 120 years ago was called to testify on Capitol Hill before a Senate committee investigating some perceived misdeeds by him. But one of the senators couldn't resist asking him, Mr. Morgan, what are the markets going to do the rest of the year? He sat back and he looked at the senator and he said, Senator, markets will fluctuate. That's all you need to know. Even private equity will fluctuate. There was increasing powder and decreasing targets of opportunity in the private equity space. There was a lot of demand being driven by the need to invest. Rates are up. That was the thrust of the article you outlined earlier with the Credit Suisse. All of a sudden, money costs money. It hadn't cost anything to borrow money for 20 years. There's some disenchantment with the private equity market. That's no secret. It's not my opinion. It's an observation about the world. So that ties to me, a driver. Thomson Reuters will tell you this. I think ALM will tell you this. The primary driver of increasing law firm profitability and revenue ever since the GFC has been the ability to raise rates year after year after year at a pace faster than inflation. I don't know how long you can play that game. It may be that we have at least run into a speed bump, if not a change in the direction of that curve. But let's assume it's just a speed bump, and clients are getting religion about fighting back. One of the things that has changed that was not true, certainly in the GFC, is board of hiring big law. Those were the only two alternatives 15 years ago. Today, there's a third alternative, which is what we call new law, or ALSPs, or whatever you want to call them. But it's technology, it's innovation. Part of it began in the days of Axiom, but should be done. But there's increasing innovation in technology. Everybody was, oohing and awing over ChatGPT. The only thing that surprised me about ChatGPT was that everybody was so surprised. I mean, this had to have happened, right? Technology's relentless, it never forgets. What does that do for lawyers? Well, it changes what they do. I don't think it means we no longer need lawyers, if for no other reason than clients are human beings, and one of the primary things clients are seeking when they hire lawyers and law firms is reassurance. You need a human being to do that. Maybe ChatGPT can take some of the scut work out of things. Hopefully it will. but it's going to need a lot of guidance. This goes back to what I was trying to say earlier, Ben, about being nimble and agile and responding, staying tuned to distant early warning signals of things changing for law firms. It may be that siloed practice areas become increasingly a thing of the past, and that you have lawyers who are bankruptcy lawyers for part of their career, private equity investment lawyers for part of their career, asset acquisition divestiture lawyers for part of their career, depending on what's needed. It's not to do different things depending on the demands of the market at different times in your career. It's a very natural thing. If law firms could provide more professional flexibility, I think that would be a good thing for the firms, and Lord knows it would be a good thing for the individuals. There's been an enormous growth in a category of lawyer in the AmLaw 200 that nobody's ever written analytically about. And I'm referring to the non-equity partner tier. 73 of the AmLaw 200 firms have more non-equity partners than they have equity partners. That would have been unimaginable when I graduated from law school. If you even use the phrase non-equity partner, people would think you probably describe something that couldn't possibly exist. But it doesn't matter what the terminology is. The fact is, it's a huge cohort of working lawyers in big law these days, and nobody's ever analyzed it. It's an example of providing more flexibility in a career path.
Let me ask a prompt question before we leave this idea of profitability, which is, if you were a managing partner today, what would be 3 levers that you would look to pull to affect profitability, to increase profitability, or looking for new growth, let's say a version of profitability? What would be the major levers that you would be pulling in the current environment that we have right now, the VUCA environment, if we all agree with this? How would you do it?
The place where there's a tremendous amount of leakage between work done and dollars that find their way to the bottom line is in realization. If a law firm could increase realization, in our company, if our realization on work we do for client engagements were 83 cents, I would be thinking we're doing something wrong, because clients don't seem to value what we're doing. It would really be a moment for some soul searching, but it's a fact. And collecting 83 cents of what you agreed to with the client is terrible. So there are 2 ways you can change it. You can move into practice areas where your clients value the work more. You ask what the managing partner can do or what law firm leadership can do, Ben, and the answer might be, if they're not getting the realization percentage they'd like, maybe there are some practices that they don't need. The second way to approach realization is with fixed fees. You have a 30-second or 1-minute conversation at the beginning among adults about what this project is going to cost, and you're done, and you never have to come back to it. And it is such a blessing. If the project begins to grow beyond what was originally envisioned, then you have another conversation, which is 30 seconds or a minute.
Right.
So I would urge managing partners and law firm leaders to think more about fixed fees than they have. I would, on this particular pain point, I would urge them to educate their partners and senior associates and business professionals again and again and again. Avoid surprises. I said it was hard to change fixed expense base of a law firm quickly, and it is. But one thing you can do over time, and you can do a lot within the space of a couple of years, is you can move more compensation for associates and non-equity partners from the salary line to the bonus pool.
Right.
And this has a couple of salutary benefits. First of all, it cuts a fixed expense. It changes it into a variable expense. And if the firm has a bad year, then bonuses are going to be lower or non-existent. And that people, if they're adults, should realize that. As I said earlier, you can't do better than your firm for very long.
Law firms cannot do better than their clients for very, very long.
There's a bigger moral, socio-ethical message in there,
Sure.
which is client first, firm second, me third. So I can't do better than the firm, but the firm can't do better than our clients. So it's clients first. But back to firm profitability, you can cut some fixed expenses. And back to your intro, teeing this up with the headlines, you can provide some, flex in your supply chain by renting lawyers from New Law, or by just outsourcing, discovery to, highly tech-enabled provider. You hand over the 3 gigabytes of e-discovery you've gotten, and you tell them that, in 2 weeks you want them to have written the narrative story, the narrative of what story it tells.
Yes.
And there are companies that increasingly can do that. And the narrative is written by journalists and English majors, not lawyers, thank God. Tech figures out in a lot quicker than 2 weeks what's in the 3 gigabytes that's interesting. Experienced lawyers look at what's interesting and decide what it means, and the journalists and English majors interview them, and they arrive at the story it tells.
Yes.
And you can do that today, and we're not talking about ChatGPT 5.0. And these are time-tested methods. It's the same thing that was the same process that would happen inside the law firm, only it's time-lapse photography. It happens really fast within these new law companies, because that's what they're optimized to do. Yes. Law firms are actually optimized to do other things than that.
Totally.
But this is part of the just-in-time, if you will, supply chain of a well-run law firm today. Totally. And that's not something that it takes Harvard law grad
exactly
20 years to do. They shouldn't be doing it. They've got better things to do.
So I want to ask you, so the last is, if you take a look at all 3 of your books, what are kind of strategies for increasing not only profitability, but to bring this back to the webinar title, how can organizations that provide legal services, what are the sort of modes, what are the type of companies that you believe are going to thrive in this new environment that we might be in?
Great question, Ben. And this is, again, by way of scenarios that I'm working on in my mind with my partner Janet, not predictions. But I think a couple of things are safe to say at this point. New law is here to stay. Both the human labor market arbitrage model and the new technologies enabled firms, which again will only get better and better as Moore's law has not actually been repealed. They're here to stay. They're capable. Their market share is growing. New law is here to stay. They provide useful services. Okay, so That's kind of the acid test. The second thing I would invite readers to do, and this is hard, really hard for law firms, is to ask themselves the hard question: where do we want to play and how do we want to win? If you're a niche player, if you have a really well-defined niche and everybody knows that's your niche, clients and lawyers, that's a very defensible position. And if you're big, I mean really big, like 2 billion a year in revenue or more, you have brand recognition, name brand recognition. There aren't a lot of firms that can claim that. You're also in a very defensible position. I am increasingly wondering how much room there is for firms that are not in one of those two camps. What is the relevance of a $600 million a year middle market kind of full service law firm? Look, I will leave your audience with one last thought. When I was in bankruptcy 101 in Stanford Law School a million years ago, I think the professor was describing the bankruptcy of Westinghouse, which was one of the largest corporate bankruptcies in America theretofore. And one of the students, at being of that era, said, but isn't this wrong? Why should the bankruptcy court let this company off the hook? Millions of people have been, or thousands of people have been fired, and customers have lost their source of supply, and we shouldn't make it so easy, for companies to go bankrupt. And the professor stood back and he looked at the student and he said, these people weren't shot. Their factories weren't bombed. These are productive economic assets which will go into productive uses. The fact is they weren't productive at Westinghouse. So, same story with law firms. If a law firm fails, like the one where I was a baby associate a long time ago, you know what? The partners went on.
Right.
I went on. It's sad. It's incredibly disruptive to the people at the firm. But it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
So if you're asking me between the lines, are we going to see some law firm failures? Yeah, I think we will. And I'm not going to, I'm a card carrying, flag waving believer in law firms, being able to provide valuable services.
Yes.
But not all of them, not forever.
Yes, right. Well, you are definitely on top of being an advocate for law firms. You are also an economist, and I think what I've always heard is creative destruction. Right? There's something about markets basically retooling things. So, true Austrian economist maybe coming through and through with you. Well, everybody, we are going to go ahead and end this next One Firm webinar. Take care, everybody, and we will be back very, very soon on another One Firm webinar. Bye, everybody. Take care.